Welcome to the P.A.S. Report podcast. If you're tired of censorship, outraged by government abuses, and thirsty for real insights, then you're in the right place. Get ready, because here, the fight for freedom never ends. Here's your host, Professor Nick Giordano.
Welcome, everyone, to the P.A.S. Report podcast. This is your host, Nick Giordano. I'm glad you could join me. Make sure you follow and subscribe to the podcast so you never miss an episode. Also, visit the P.A.S. Report website, pasreport.com, and share this episode with your family and friends. Obviously, with the Trump administration coming in, we're going to be seeing a lot of changes within the bureaucracy, particularly at the FBI. So I got a great guest coming on today. I have retired Executive Assistant Director of the FBI and author of Wanted, the FBI I Once Knew, Chris Piehota, joining me. Chris, welcome to the program. How are you?
I'm good, and thank you for the opportunity to visit with you and your audience.
Well, I'm glad you could be here. I mean, obviously, over the course of your career, you spent, nearly 25 years in the FBI. So what was the fundamental change that you noticed from when you first started to when you left?
The fundamental change came in the leadership environment after 9/11. 9/11 was seen as that watershed event, changed the country, changed the FBI, kind of changed the world. And after 9/11, the FBI was shaken to its core by the perceived failures of the community and the FBI to protect the American people. And there was a demand for change, and the FBI was transformed from a traditional law enforcement organization, the kind of cops and robbers organization that it was, and we excelled at, to more of a domestic security and intelligence agency. And the culture of the FBI was violently shifted away from what it was to meet certain 9/11 or post 9/11 expectations by the national leadership. That's where it all started. And along the way, certain strategic and tactical decisions were made out of survival. The FBI was trying to survive. And, we kind of evolved into where the FBI is today. And you can see some of the challenges that have evolved over time due to political, social, and just general evolutionary forces on the Bureau.
Yeah, without a doubt. And once it picked up that intelligence function, the intelligence component to it, it wasn't long after that it seemed to morph into more a political entity, particularly within the leadership. How did that impact just the everyday work of the FBI and particularly agents like yourself that started from the bottom up?
Yeah. The FBI, and I'll tell you one thing, the FBI always used intelligence to do what it was doing, but it wasn't an intelligence-focused organization. You have to use information and intelligence to predict, prevent, to conduct investigative work. So that was always part of the FBI's working model, but it wasn't the primary focus that it became after 9/11 because of all of these perceived intelligence failures that had occurred. And some were true and some were more perceived, but the FBI changed into being more of an intelligence-focused function that over time it became way too conciliatory on trying to please the political positions in D.C. versus maybe standing and using the steel backbone that the Bureau once had to say, no, that's not right. No, that's not what we're doing. The Bureau became more conciliatory. And what I saw over time as I was moving through the organization in my career is that the FBI at one point was very resistant to political influence as much as it could be in D.C. And what I saw was that the leadership became more and more either unable or unwilling to properly navigate the political waters and became more, again, conciliatory toward political overtures and influences.
Yeah, and one of the concerning things is, as it did become, move more towards the political direction, particularly in leadership, is the abuses of power that we've witnessed over the course of the last several years. I mean, from the Crossfire Hurricane investigation into Donald Trump, hampering him throughout his administration. Then, over time, we see the repeated abuses with FISA. I believe the court ruled over 278,000 times that FISA information was taken that shouldn't have been, violating America's privacy. And then you move on to parents and school board meetings and the traditional Catholics coming out of the Richmond product down over in Virginia, that turned out that in California and Washington, they were also working with this Richmond product. What were your thoughts on that? When you found out about the Richmond product, were you like, what happened to the FBI? What's going on here?
Well, that was one of the themes of my book, is wanted, the FBI I once knew. And when I was coming through the FBI as a career agent, those types of things really weren't going to happen, because there were chains of leadership that would have stopped it. There were people who would have been against certain actions or courses of action that later on we suffered from a decline in the leadership culture, where people were no longer willing to stand in the breach, so to speak, and say, no, we can't do this. No, that's not right. When it comes to FISA, you're talking about 702 coverage and collection, primarily, I believe. The FBI is great with the rest of the intelligence community collecting information to support investigations and operations. What they failed at was proper use and governance of the information that they collected when there was an incidental collection where U.S. persons or U.S. citizens were in contact with overseas investigative targets. So that's where the FBI, the governance of that information, that's where the FBI struggled a bit, and they didn't control the information as well as they could have, and they didn't put certain structures in place to manage that information, and people were able to access it probably more readily than they should have been. So that FISA 702 thing was again, I tell people this with the government, and I saw this firsthand. Here's a philosophy that brings us to the Richmond memo. If some is good, then more is better, and then too much is just right. So that type of activity, like the Richmond memo, when the FBI is set out on a hunt for domestic violent extremists, and people are saying, we got to find something, and you start looking at domestic issues and then the extreme right and all those themes that were being promoted during the last administration. Again, so if some is good, more is better, too much is just right. Well, people go into traditional Catholic masses and that are given in Latin, which have been done for centuries. That could be extremism. So again, I think that type of behavior was incentivized throughout the community, but it wasn't stood up to, and it wasn't stood against by what used to be the, again, iron bone of FBI leadership and managers.
I think you're bringing up a good point. The mindset, we got to find something. I mean, listen, I understand the bureaucracy. I mean, I've been part of the swamp to a certain degree when I was in emergency management and homeland security, where, people have to justify their positions. If you don't have a threat, well, then the budgets are going to get trimmed down. We all know that. However, when I look at the traditional Catholic memo, the Richmond product that came out, because I think that shows the shift, the evolution to ideology, right? They used the Southern Poverty Law Center as the backbone of the intel analysis, basically deeming that the Southern Poverty Law Center should be running intelligence operations, which is pretty astounding to me. And it shows that ideological bent to it. Now, how do we depoliticize the FBI? I mean, we've seen how political it's gotten. How do we begin to tamp that back and reform it, where ideology isn't the driver behind investigations, where it's not about, Democrat or Republican, it's about doing the mission of law enforcement and protecting the United States of America?
Well, there are three areas that I made recommendations for. You have to start with the leadership environment. The leadership of the FBI has to be turned over. It has to be reset, reoriented to FBI core mission principles. The FBI of old had still a lot of good about it and was discarded for the new FBI, the new corporatized FBI. That was one of the reasons I left the organization when I did, because they started trying to run the FBI as if it was Google or Netflix. They started trying to use private sector management and leadership approaches. And the FBI at its core is a mission organization. It is not a Silicon Valley software company, nor is it a bank or any of these other organizations that the FBI's leadership benchmarked against to look for new leadership concepts. The FBI has to return to a culture of mission first, of service to the American people. And the FBI, I think, over time drifted from being an organization with pride to a prideful organization. And if they can't assess themselves and they can't look at how the American people and the national leadership that they serve views them, then you drift into these dangerous areas where you start using, the leaders start using their own ideological positions to set the priorities for the organization, right? Crossfire Hurricane, great example. We had a bunch of people who, when put together, had like minds, like political ideologies, and they substituted their own personal beliefs for the FBI mission objectives of conducting a skilled, professional, objective investigation. Right? They lost sight of that, and I think they lost their emotional professionalism. They got emotional, and they lost their objectivity when it came to looking at the circumstances and not the people involved. So you have to go with one, leadership culture. Two, you have to go with the practices of the organization, the leadership practices. Three, you have to look at the operational practices. I'm sure you've heard people talk about, well, we haven't changed any of our policies or standards. Yes, but are you doing what you say you were doing? Are you in line with the policies and practices, or is the current leadership allowing activities and adaptations of standards that are no longer in line with FBI standards, right? And I think that's where you have to look and make sure people are doing what they say they're doing and doing what they're supposed to be doing. So
Yeah.
those are the first three large areas, if I was to give counsel to a new FBI director, that you must set in on before you start looking at the micro issues.
Absolutely. And that culture has to be changed within the FBI. And I want to stick with the culture for a minute
Right.
because one of the things, I mean, the FBI used to have extraordinarily high standards to be an agent. I mean, they still do to a certain degree, especially when we talk about special agents. But something changed along the way where, I mean, I've spoken to George Hill, numerous times about this, where instead of, let's say, hiring veterans or people with law enforcement experience, it used to be the average age of an FBI agent when they were first hired was like 27 or 28 years old. Secret Service was 22, 23 years old, but they wanted the professionalism. Then they started recruiting from college campuses, particularly in the intel component of the FBI. Mm-hmm. How did that change the culture?
A couple of things here. First of all, the FBI agent recruiting approach changed after 9/11. Director Mueller, after a little while on the job, decided that he wanted to prioritize what he called a more intellectual FBI agent cadre because of this new thing called cybercrime. Right. And at the time, the
Didn't
FBI
they realize that every bad idea morphs from the higher education college campuses?
Not at the time they didn't. Okay. But that came back to bite us on the tail. Right. So they started going back to the college campuses because the FBI was one of the primary organizations at the time. Now everybody's gone to this practice, but you had to have a 4-year degree to be considered for FBI special agent candidacy. So they started going back to those colleges and they deprioritized the hiring of former law enforcement, former military folks. And it changed the fabric of the special agent cadre, right? When you're bringing in former law enforcement, former military, people who know how to work in a chain of command environment, mission environment, they're asked to do hard things daily. And now you have a bunch of folks. And again, I love my brothers and sisters with their, with the poli-sci degrees and all that good stuff. That's great. But it's a different thought process. And plus, as our universities have started taking a more left-leaning position on things over the past several decades, that's what we started importing into the Bureau. Now, the Bureau didn't do a very good job of reorienting people as they came in, especially in the intelligence cadre. They brought them in with this thought process of you're here to fix the FBI. Well, they didn't tell them that, hey, you're joining us and our certain set of cultural beliefs and values and practices. They allowed these folks to come in and retain their own ideologies. And then over time, we had this multi-generational, multi-ideological workforce that the FBI capitulated to. They didn't come out and say, you joined us. Here's how we do things. The FBI leadership said, well, we have to change with the times and we want to put butts in seats. So we have to keep these people happy. And that's when we saw the emergence of the more kinder, gentler FBI, more of the emotional intelligence FBI, and this and that. And I don't think it made us a better FBI overall. It might have made the work environment a little more congenial after 9/11, but it didn't make us a better FBI for the long run.
No, and it's really not that hard. I mean, keep your ideology out of your work. I mean, when I was in emergency management, I worked for Governor Cuomo's office in New York State Office of Emergency Management. Never once would I allow my conservative ideology to infect the mission of the job that I was doing, even though I disagreed with Cuomo politically on a whole host of issues. But unfortunately, today, ideology is what drives people. I mean, but now we are starting to see a shift. I think there is a backlash. Obviously, a lot of people are tired of the DEI nonsense. We see that, the current president just signed executive orders starting to pare down diversity, equity, inclusion. I think back to just what we saw on New Year's Day with the attack in New Orleans, and you look at the FBI agent, immediately that the spokesperson that came out was saying, oh, no terrorism related, no ties to ISIS, even though the person drove with an ISIS flag. How much does that hurt the FBI's mission when you have a DEI culture that's being forced upon it?
It's exceptionally destructive to the FBI culture because now we're doing business based upon people's feelings. We're doing business based upon the fear of offending people. That is what they're concerned about now, as opposed to this is a logical investigative position. We are going to treat that. And I watched that news conference, and I was very. It was surprising to me that they came out and that all that lady had to do was just exercise her ability to not say anything, right? But they've been taught for years now that you don't assume it's terrorism because then you'll offend certain communities, and
Unless it's Catholics.
Well, yeah, of course, the traditional Catholic environment doesn't really matter, but you don't want to offend certain communities, and I think that's been their training. So I don't fault her as much as I fault the FBI on how they condition their field office executives. Don't offend anybody. Don't say anything offensive, as opposed to saying, until proven otherwise, we're looking at this as a potential terrorist activity. We'll keep you posted. We just got here. We're working with our partners. Right? Just don't say anything else. But she couldn't do it because that's not what she was trained to do. And again, you see, I don't know that lady, and I've never had the pleasure of speaking with her, but I think that a lot of these folks now at these field office executive levels, they're having a hard time keeping their personal feelings and ideologies out of discussions, where the FBI used to be much more stoic and much more, the old dragnet Joe Friday, just the facts, right? And now we have FBI agents have to, for some reason, provide their personal opinions and things, which I think it's a bad turn for the organization.
Yeah, I agree. It's certainly a bad turn. And, it's not just about the culture, it's about affecting the mission. I mean,
Right.
when January 6th happened, we saw FBI agents being taken off human trafficking cases, organized crime cases in order to go after the January 6th people. And you saw a shift. not just in the targeting and how it's being targeted, but also the number count as well, right? So January 6th would have been considered one incident. Instead, they made every individual case an incident to inflate domestic terrorism numbers. Why were they doing that?
Well, some of it is to again bring prominence to the issue, right? They want to show that they have X number of cases versus one large enterprise case, right? And they also, and what people don't understand is they assign cost codes to different investigative activities so that they can come back in the next year and ask for more resources because we have this explosion in these type of cases. Therefore, we need a certain amount of more bodies based upon the caseload, right? So some of that is just Washington D.C. resource wrangling, okay? But I do think that the FBI, its priorities have been shifted away from, again, core mission responsibilities. What the FBI does at its core mission soul is to combat national security threats and crime problems for the United States people, the American
What do
people.
you think is the biggest threat that we are facing? And do you think that the FBI, I mean, listen, I'm not a fan of Director Wray at all. I've criticized him numerous times. At the same time, he has been warning about Islamic extremism in the United States, terrorists infiltrating through the southern border, radicalization in that matter, and also China. What do you see as the biggest threat that we face?
We face a two level threat right now. One is the threat environment that we have allowed to develop inside the United States due to the open southern border. We have people in this country right now who we don't know where they are, we don't know who they are, and we know that they have come here not to add to our society, but to possibly injure our society. Right? We know they're here. We've allowed this threat environment to develop and intensify over time. So I think that's our larger domestic threat. The secondary threat is the competition and rivalry and adversarial nature of some of our international competitors, which you China, Russia, the usual crowd, right? We've been looking down and inward at our own people, and I think the FBI has not prioritized properly the threats from external powers as well as the threat that we have allowed to develop inside our own communities, where we have these people from other countries who, again, they bring certain behaviors and certain criminal activities to our society. The United States, prior to now, used to be a pretty high trust, high security society, and we're losing that rapidly. And I think it's going to get worse before it gets better. And the people, and I'll finish this statement with this: we're going to see a different type of threat environment developing, where you'll hear the term Fedayeen or Fedaylian attacks will start happening in the United States over time, meaning that you're going to see more guerrilla warfare type of activities, where you're going to see more of the January 1st type of attack, where people are willing to fight, not run. They're going to fight. They're going to use small arms. They're going to use IEDs, and they're going to use things like automobiles as weapons against our open society. And we're not ready for it on a state, local, or federal level. We're not ready for it.
And I have to ask, because now that you have Mexican cartels that are going to be declared as transnational terrorist organizations, obviously it unleashes a number of tools that the government could use to go after these organizations by doing that. But how does that impact the threat environment here in the United States, given the capabilities of the cartels and their reach within the United States?
Right. The cartels are exceptionally powerful, and I used to go out and give presentations. I would tell people the problem with the international drug cartels or organized crime organizations, they're functioning more and more on a disciplined, elite level that rivals your more traditional intelligence organizations. They have intelligence, they have military power, they have technology now. It's not the couple of drug dealing dirtbags on a street corner that we used to worry about. These people operate in a sophisticated manner now, I mean, you've heard the stories, I'm sure, about these robbery gangs, these international gangs. They come here and they use frequency jammers now to take out people's alarm systems. They know how to pick locks. They know how to do all these things. And another thing, people say, well, how can that be? And I say, look, these organizations have one thing, and that's money. They can hire in skill, they can hire in knowledge. They hire people from other countries, former intelligence officers, who teach them how to do these things. So they're becoming more sophisticated, and they're more willing than ever to challenge our power structures and our authorities. And you've seen like the shooting of the Border Patrol agent that happened, right? They're willing to engage our law enforcement now because our law enforcement has been emasculated and demoralized over the past several years, to where people are now willing to engage our law enforcement on levels that just previously were unforeseen. So I just think that things are going to get a little worse before they get better.
Yeah, I anticipate that too. And just one last question,
Sure.
what are your thoughts on Kash Patel coming in as the FBI director if he gets approved, as well as the biggest challenge he's probably going to be facing it within the FBI?
Right. As far as Mr. Patel goes, I wish him the best. I think he's got an uphill battle to fight in the confirmation process, as all the nominees do, right? I think he is being brought in as a change agent. I know he has a certain loyalty to the current president, that the president feels confident in Mr. Patel doing and sharing his vision for the FBI. I think Mr. Patel is going to be that change agent because he doesn't have previous ties with the organization. He's not going to be grounded by personal relationships or any feelings of nostalgia, so to speak, for the organization. So he'll be a good person to bring in and take a fresh look at how the organization is doing business. And again, I wish him the best. I think his confirmation hearing is now being set for the end of this month, from what I understand. So
yeah, it's certainly going to be one to watch. And
I agree. And whereas challenge, he's gonna have. Well, as far as the confirmation goes, I think his challenges are going to be. They're going to question his experience in running an organization as large and powerful as the FBI, right? So he's got to work. He's got to work on his strategy there. He also has to talk about some of his previous podcast appearances and his book that he wrote. Some things he said in those appearances and in that book will probably be brought back, and he'll be questioned on them. So I think he's probably strategizing on that from a response perspective. When he gets to the FBI, if he's successful, I think his challenges are going to be on a couple of layers. One, he's got to bring a group of people with him who understand the FBI and it's how it does business, and he's got to bring folks with him who are going to be warriors in changing the FBI culture. He's got to start there. He's got to start looking at the leadership. He's going to have to go in and assemble a team of people who believe in what he's looking to do, and then he's got to bring forth a logical plan of action that he can present to the people of the FBI on how we're going to do certain things, why we have to make some changes, and here's what you can expect in the next 90 to 180 to 360 days, right? So people right now are probably very apprehensive. They're anxious. You saw the leadership change out at the FBI, and the director Ray left. Paula Bate, who was the deputy director, was the acting director for one day, and then he retired. And then now you have a guy who's the acting director of the FBI, who several weeks ago was a entry-level executive at FBI headquarters, right? So a lot of change going on. So he's going to come in, he's going to have to reestablish as much normalcy for the workforce that he can while he's making fundamental changes to how the Bureau does its business. Again, those three areas: leadership environment, culture, and operational practices. He can't get tied up in the micro operations of the FBI. He'll never get anything done. He's got to stay at that high level and give that strategic direction. So that would be my counsel to him on his way in. And he's got to make sure that he's getting honest assessment from the people, and he's got to make sure that they're working with him, and that he's going to make sure that we bring forth a better, sustainable FBI for the American people.
Yeah, destroying the bureaucratic mindset is always the hardest thing to do in these agencies, and not just the FBI, just the totality of government.
Of course.
You know, Chris, I really enjoyed the conversation, and everyone needs to check out Wanted, the FBI once knew. I'm going to have links up at the PAS Report website, PASreport.com, so check that out. Chris, thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate the opportunity to visit with you and your audience.
Thank you for listening to the P.A.S. Report. Don't forget to rate, share, and hit that subscribe button. That way you'll never miss an episode. For more exclusive content and updates, visit us at PASreport.com and follow Professor Giordano on all social media platforms at P.A.S. Report.